So this is going to be a very hors d'oeuvre presentation, just touching on a few things. Certainly not going to dive deep into any of them, nor touch on all of them. Art, labor, and community, vast, right? Huge, huge. But I will put in chat a document that has links to almost everything that I'm going to reference, so you can follow up, as well as if you open chat, feel free to comment or post questions. The materials that I want to share will not take an hour, so hopefully we'll have some real time together to hear from you about these topics. So please just be comfortable. I actually, before sharing my screen and starting to show, I'll put the document in chat when I stop sharing my screen in a few minutes, okay? And I just need to hope everyone's comfortable. I have to acknowledge it's a little bit chilly in my studio right now, and I can't really access the thermostat. But fortunately, right here, I have this thermometer, and it is chilly. It is really chilly. So give me just a second. Kind of get a little comfort while we chat, right? And that should do it. There you go, 68 degrees, measured in real time. So as Monty Python ludicrous as that might be, a thermometer is a great tool to measure temperature, right? If that's what we need to know the temperature. A thermometer is a great tool. It's much better than a hammer. It's a great tool, but how we use it is sometimes a little more challenging. The thermometer can do the job of telling us the temperature. It cannot help us know how to use that fact. Okay, so a large part, I think, of challenges in the arts and in labor and in community is how we define and measure many things. So if that example seems ludicrous, I'm going to share my screen. It is ludicrous, by the way. It comes from a book called The Little Big Number. There's a link in the document about that, an amazing author who helped us understand how hopeless GDP is for telling us how well we're doing. And on that thought, I'm going to share my screen. And first, we're going to listen to just a couple minutes, not even, I'll cut it when he gets to the good stuff. Wilbur Ross, current Secretary of Commerce in the United States of America. He's going to talk to us about how you, Janet, host disabled attendee screen sharing. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I hope they haven't slipped a new ad in here.
The banks and the credit unions should be making credit available to them. When you think about it, these are basically government guaranteed loans because the government has committed these folks will get their back pay once this whole thing gets settled down. So there really is not a good excuse why there really should be a liquidity crisis. Now, true, the people might have to pay a little bit of interest, but the idea that it's paycheck or zero is not a really valid idea.
Mr. Secretary, there are reports that there are some federal workers who are going to homeless shelters to get food.
Well, I know they are, and I don't really quite understand why, because as I mentioned before, the obligations that they would undertake, say a borrowing from a bank or a credit union, are in effect federally guaranteed. So the 30 days of pay that some people will be out, there's no real reason why they shouldn't be able to get a loan against it. And we've seen a number of ads from financial institutions doing that. You're talking about 800,000 workers. And while I feel sorry for the individuals that have hardship cases, 800,000 workers if they never got their pay, which is not the case, they will eventually get it. But if they never got it, you're talking about 1/3% on our GDP.
So that's the part I wanted to share. His sentence manages to refer to 800,000 human beings. It doesn't include family members. It doesn't include local businesses that count on those people as clients. It doesn't refer to contract labor, and a significant proportion of federal employees are not salaried, they're contract labor. We'll talk about contract labor a couple of times. And instead, he asks that we focus on 1/3 of, or 1%, whatever it is, of gross domestic product, okay? So we're gonna mostly look at how various ways artists and the arts have been parts of these discussions, but I definitely wanted to kick it off. Got to get my money's worth from that economics degree. And because I also believe that they're related. So I will make some comments about this artist in a little bit and the work that he's doing, but wanted to think of, so in the arts, a couple of complications with labor. One, the US government's position that it's too politicized and that it'd be better serve the arts by private funding or local communities has buffed up the art administration positions, increased the complexity of bureaucracy in the arts, mostly nonprofits, but has not been able for that to support artists and the arts directly. Across industries, another problem in general with labor practices, labor laws. There are many ways to hire workers that will not require the employee to meet certain legislative demands. Contract labor could specify that you don't have certain rights. And of course, part-time positions, the number of people who have, say, a 28-hour work week that on the one hand blocks so much of their time, second jobs are not going to be that easy to facilitate. On the other hand, it's also not providing them with sufficient means to meet their needs. So there are other ways to measure how we're doing than gross domestic product. Simon Kuznets in the immigrates from the then Soviet Union, 1917, to the States. And when the Great Depression hits, no one really knows how bad the economy is, right? There's no system to measure it. And that's what he's tasked with doing, Department of Commerce contract. So he came up with a gross domestic product, in any case, a version of it. In the 70s, when he was given the Nobel Prize in economics, he took the stand and repeated what he said when he released his decision on here. Here is a means to measure the economy. He said, gross domestic product cannot tell us how well we're doing. But it in fact is the #1 reference. Indonesia destroyed 80% of its natural resources in less than 10 years, trying to meet IMF defined GDP growth rates. So there are other ways though. And vocabulary becomes a problem because it's so many different words. So what with the alternative economy, the solidarity economy, the new economy, I'm uncomfortable with alternative because it implies, it kind of grants space. Do I have an alternative lifestyle? Not for me. It's the lifestyle I'm living. And so kind of placing it as an us versus them, I'm not happy with that word. The new economy, you will hear this. I'm not that happy with that word because many of these models, many of these ways that human beings build their communities, their relationships to one another are in no way new. It's more about how they are measured and thus recognized or overlooked. So I'll go with solidarity economy. Now, in this very short listing of, in some cases, entire categories like barter, or these are specific entities, the Baltimore gift economy with Chrysalin, community wealth builders, et cetera. In the document, there are links for these particular, many of them are Baltimore based or Maryland based in any case. So that'll be some more info that you'll have to pursue if you wanted to look into that more later. But the bulk of material I hope to share today is about how arts had played some role in this. So Jean-Claude Lumeny was a photography curator at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris for many years, many decades. And he, a very, very prolific writer, he gives us this sentence at one point: art is by definition subversive. Lumeny meant by subversive that he meant the dictionary definition of the word. Versive from vertigo, turmoil, change, okay? Subversive, change from within. And it's not a vacuum, it has a history and thus a future. Art critic Leo Steinberg uses these words. We're kind of the same idea, right? Or at least a twist on it, right? It's change. So there can be resistance to change. There can be internal resistance to change. Even when the change is for the better, right? People who struggle with substances struggle when they stop abusing them, which is for their good, but it's change and it takes its own dynamics. It's challenging, right? So in the art world, if it's new, it means it's challenging what you got, maybe you had just gotten used to or comfortable with. So on this idea of art playing a role in social awareness and social engagement and social policies, I start with this image. This is the first image of the planet Earth taken from the moon. So thank you, NASA. For some reason, they didn't release it for several years. It took some pressure groups. Never got the backstory on why that was happening. And the reason I include this is up until, so where I think it was published early 70s, of course, there were local environmental groups or actions. You know, your town was, there was a factory upstream from your town polluting that river. Workers in a certain facility that were contacting certain diseases at an alarming rate. But it was only after this image was published that the first global environmental groups and movements formed. So I think of this because of the power of seeing, right? Seeing is believing. We use the verb to see to mean to understand, right? Do you see what I mean? If I said, do you smell what I mean? Hopefully we're in a cooking class, because otherwise that's not what the sentence. Seeing is believing. We have examples from civil rights. We have examples from child labor 100 years ago. Many things were political campaigns brought to a halt by one photograph. The facts were not new. It was the impact of seeing it in a photograph. So some specific artists, Chris Jordan he constructs these digital images around various themes. And you can read here, it's a somewhat nauseating numbers. In fact, playing or counting the numbers is the name of the series. So this is 2.4 million pieces of plastic. That's how many pounds of plastic are dumped in the ocean every hour. And he gathered some of that plastic and recreated, this image. Here's a close-up. Another somewhat startling, concerning statistic, in this case, plastic cups, and the million cups that he used to make this composition equals the number used on airlines in the US every 6 hours. If we zoom in. Critical Ensemble is a group of activists, of artists, of thinkers who their methodology is to try and use systems and mechanics as they are to subvert or resist or challenge those systems and mechanics. Okay, for instance, I think this is ongoing. There's a bank of computers in Switzerland. The computers are running various websites. The websites only exist for this project. We couldn't visit them. They don't offer anything. On those websites, each website has sold ad space. So the website will collect money from the company that is advertising on that space. you know, a penny for a million hits. I don't know what the rate is. And in that case, if I'm remembering correctly, the ads are from the fossil fuel industries. And apparently there's quite the sum of money that's growing in a Swiss bank. That, last I heard, they have no stated goal for using that money. As an example of, they're using a system as it's designed to otherwise get results that system did not want. So, Critical Ensemble, this is a project at the Corcoran in Washington, D.C., where, so Monsanto, the agricultural company, or actually it was a petroleum chemical company, then it becomes this seed company, and they genetically modify seeds so that, number one, they can't reproduce. Farmers have to buy new seeds every year. Two, the plants only respond to Monsanto fertilizers and pesticides. So you have to purchase that from them. Three, a significant contingency in their employees is comprised of lawyers, because if pollen from Monsanto plants blows onto a farmer's property who has not paid for Monsanto products, they take them to court, and the courts have continued to have found that that is infringement of copyright. And in many, many cases, it's not simply paying off that fine. These are the smaller farms that are having to face this army of lawyers. So the large corporate agricultural entities just get larger, okay? There have been some encouraging court decisions in just the last couple of years about that practice. So this project, Molecular Invasion, what they did is they installed these flower beds in the Corcoran, and then they re-genetically engineered those plants so that they would reproduce seeds, so that they would respond to any fertilizer or pesticide. And then that's all. The product at that point was not for sale. It wasn't developed, or that was it. So Monsanto sues them for copyright infringement. The police invaded their headquarters. They lost manuscripts as well as hardware and other equipment that was never returned. The team of lawyers from Monsanto were sending such thick and so many envelopes of legal documents that Critical Ensemble just stopped opening them. They didn't have a team of lawyers, and they weren't able to even go through them. So they just asked the Corcoran to put a wooden pallet in the museum, and they just had that mail unopened, dropped as it piled up on this pallet in the museum. After 3 years, a judge decided they had not infringed on copyright, so immediately they were charged with mail fraud because they had mailed invitations to this exhibit that crossed state lines. That case took 2 years before they were cleared of any wrongdoing. And after those 5 years of going through this legal battle, when asked, what precautions do you take now to protect yourself from again losing manuscripts, property, etc.? And their answer was 0. The experience convinced them that when powerful people want to get you, it won't be based on anything you've done. Some of the examples won't be quite as depressing as that, but they're out there making that voice. And we've seen, like I say, some changes with some of the most recent decisions. So here's a very different scale. If nothing else, already the context, right? So that's an institution. It's quite the group. We're inside a museum. There's a lot of heritage, a lot of baggage, for good and for bad. This group, Unruly, went around in the public and engaged people, wanted to give people a chance to talk about why they might find it acceptable to reach over and touch somebody, even if they might not appreciate it if someone reached over and touched them. So they didn't write out answers. They didn't write out a policy statement, or they wanted to listen to people and have that conversation be the work. So this would be an example of social practice. It's a niche in the arts that's a little hard to define. Usually it doesn't involve institutions. It doesn't produce a work of art. It's closer to performance, but even then it's different. You can touch my hair. Okay, this is one of my favorite, Henry Doctor. This is the Q Street entrance to the DuPont Circle Metro in DC. Okay, So as a private citizen, Mr. Doctor, who lives in the neighborhood, took it upon himself for several years to landscape the entrance to that metro station. It's got this, that's very deep slopes with all these cut out access to dirt. So he's gardening. He's out there gardening on his own and was known for it. The neighborhood appreciated it, or some, those who spoke up. And then one day the metro authorities told him he had to stop. Something happened, that he had to stop doing that. So what Mr. Doctor did, he printed out the emails he was getting from the neighborhood. Emails praising his work, emails upset with Metro, whatever they were, he printed them out, and then he makes this cage-like thing, and he put all of the local thoughts and messages on it, and then he suspended it over the public escalators at the Q Street entrance to the Metro. Okay, I already think that's so audacious. That's one reason I like his story, but hold on. As he tried to install it, he realized it's not a one-person job. He needed help. So he went down into the Metro, introduced himself to the Metro station manager, and told the station manager he needed help upstairs to suspend a cage over the public escalators at this entrance. And the manager came up and helped him put it in. So I'm not really sure what kind of safety training managers go through. And so I don't know. I just don't know how a cage over a public escalator could possibly be safe. And power to you, Mr. Doctor, for pulling that off. And the final reason that I'm touched by his story, acting alone, not asking for credit or particular anything. We can't, like the picture of the Earth from the moon, causality, we can't exactly know. But I can tell you, Metro has landscaped that entrance ever since. So somewhere in there, a dialogue was happening via all his work. Okay, Suzanne Lacey, Between the Door and the Street. So I mentioned social practice. That's somewhat awkward to understand, to define, part of the arts. Miss Lacey hangs out on people's porches and stoops and engages them in conversation. That is her practice. Mr. Pawlinski, so the first image that I had, these are somewhat, I'm sorry if you have triggers or need to avert your eyes, please do. So he's an activist, performance artist in Moscow. The first image where he had sewn his lips closed, he was trying to raise awareness about censorship and freedom of speech. You can read the words here for what this particular act specifically he was hoping to. So he doesn't, his approach is not to necessarily provide answers, right? But it's in those steps and levels of engagement. It's about inviting people to be aware, inviting people to think of their own complicity for something they might value, but not find time to do anything about. And one last image from his work, where this also had to do with freedom of speech. Here's a very happy one. Well, it's got a sad start. Happy ending, spoiler alert. TAMS year 10, the TAMS. The TAMS was a high security prison in Illinois. Okay, it was designed, it only accommodated solitary confinement. Once you were incarcerated, you would not see another human being until you were released. Even meals were slid, a two-door system, something. By the time you can get to your meal, the human who delivered it is behind a now closed door. It had a terrible track record, incredible recidivism rate, returning incarcerated, returning citizen, incarcerated, back and forth. It had an incredible suicide rate. And all it would take to close it down It just mechanically required the governor signing a piece of paper saying you have to close. However, it was a private prison, and that company was a major donor to the governor's campaign. So that was not going to just happen. So Lori Reynolds and quite the team of brilliant people put together TAM's Year 10. Excuse me. And it took many years. And they worked in many, many ways. They considered everybody in Illinois part of this story. The gentleman in the facility, okay? They would ask the gentleman, because they could communicate, they just couldn't meet. If you could get an image, what would you like? And then they would try to find postcards of those images. Specifically, she said the two most common themes were clowns and crosses. That's an interesting one. They used postcards to, they had citizens, in this case, children, write to decision makers in positions of power. Just working again on this general awareness. They were also very much in the governor's face, meetings usually with staff, meetings with legislatures, researching to provide data and facts on how such purely punitive options actually increase the crime rate. It's how you measure, right? If you say, well, everyone who was convicted spent the required time in that facility, job done, or if you're trying to reduce crime, you would conclude two different things about the success of this facility. At one point, they recreated their headquarters at the Art Institute in Chicago and actually worked there. And people were able to either just stand there and watch them work. Some people asked if they could help and chipped in. Again, they viewed everybody in Illinois as part of the story. And the facility was closed down. So she also got a MacArthur grant shortly afterwards, and so deserves it. Our country and the world will be better off with what that resource, those resources will do in her hands. Baltimore, wall hunters. Just a couple more here with these examples from the art world. This is a couple partner teamwork on this project that would identify certain buildings that weren't up to code or had other issues, and the landlord wouldn't do anything, whatever the hierarchy of you're supposed to take care of such things was not responding. And then provide those addresses to artists who would go and do graffiti, do these installation, drawings, and then put these, codes where in real time, as you stood there, you could connect with the landlords, the decision makers. It really just streamlined the whole process of you're staring at an issue. If you care, here's how complicated your next step is. You're gonna have to push a couple of buttons before you keep walking. I think it was in 2013 that the lawsuits started, landlord, at least one, who claimed this was, without permission, and so you're destroying property, etc. It's another sort of long process. Good news, the judge decided that they had committed no crime whatsoever. Having said that, just to repeat again, sometimes even when you win in such cases, these such lawsuits can be devastating. They can still end a lot of good, including the goodwill, the good heart of people who are trying. Wall hunters. Okay, and the last artist that I'd like to share with you goes by JR. He's a French artist, and he produces these large, he always defined himself as a street artist. And at first he would do drawings, and then he would just go put it on a wall somewhere and walk away. And he worked like that for a while. And at some point it worked into this, where he produces these really large portraits and then installs them in the landscape of the locale. And there's going to be something going on in the locale. In one case, the women of the village were asking the government to acknowledge that they had kidnapped and killed either husbands, fathers, or sons. They wanted closure. That's all they were asking for. Different things. So if you can make out here in this, the bottom half of the faces are on that slope, then the eyes are on the cars of trains. And as the trains pull by, they can line up and complete the portraits. This is in Jerusalem. There's an Israeli-Palestinian thing happening here, but the portraits are paired by professions. So it's like, well, those are chauffeurs and those are plumbers or whatever it is. Just an invitation to think about what unites, what divides us. On the rooftops in this town. Okay, just a couple words about two of my projects that works more specifically with art and labor and community. This place has a voice. This was 2012, 2014 in DC. And this is an example of one of many activities, a lot going on over the time, many artists, historians. These are some students in the humanities who are installing some portraits that JR provided of long-term residents in Canal Park neighborhood, so near Southeast DC. Note, and that's on your, the document again, you'll have that. JR provides large portraits like this for other people's projects. Okay, he does request a certain donation, and I'm sure that's helpful. They do their best to just provide them, even in cases where that donation might not be a possibility. So we did a lot of work with the neighborhood. It really involved listening. And one takeaway for me was an artist can be parachuted into a neighborhood, a community, with the somewhat colonialistic instruction. Someone's got to take them some art, right? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to be more inclusive now. It's things like sending a military band to play in West Baltimore in a park one afternoon. There, now the arts have been spread, as if communities aren't already celebrating them. And so that was a huge takeaway for me. I was really treated to these really moving poetry readings, and they had written this themselves. These knockout fashion shows that you just couldn't believe. And they had designed and sewn all that stuff, right? So it's good. You take a little humility pill before you say, I'm an artist and I'm gonna prove it. Beautiful, really beautiful people. It culminated in an event day. In case it's not obvious, that name was a placeholder and we just never changed it. So event day in the park and in the neighborhood. There were historical tours, there were installations, interactive installations that were dispersed, dance, performance, projections. The cube you see in the middle left there, those white surfaces are, there are data projectors in that. So there's imagery that's going, et cetera, et cetera. As successful as the art and community component to this was, the administrative side was disastrous. The designated art administrator pulled out. And so that was an eye-opener, right? You think you're part of a solution. You're just feeding the beast. So did a little research, figured out a way to measure if this was so funded, where really did the money come from? So 0.5% Humanities Council, actually they never paid any of that. So that needs to be updated. You get 4% from Department of Transportation. That was one component. The DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, supposedly the funder, actually 9%, and they did not release all of those funds. Curator and project manager, I paid 30% of that project over years out of my pocket, and 56.5% came out of the pockets of the contributing artists. Another update to this at some point, and I apologize, it's embarrassing. I didn't even calculate and include the resources the community we were supposedly serving had provided, because they were significant. And it's another challenge with definitions. Thinking of them as those being served, I just didn't keep track of how much they were providing, which again was tremendous. So lesson learned. That won't happen again. Okay. My current project is called A View from the Inside Out. It's basically a mentor skill sharing one-on-one program that these teams of two eventually also collaborate and come up with larger community activities. So different artists, it's not limited to artists, and I'll share that link for any of you who would be interested in participating in a skill sharing barter network, but we use the arts a lot. And the goal again is skill sharing, that the torch is passed and that the others, that some who couldn't have done it before, not only independently work at this point, but they could teach it. And my goal is to be able to hire them back as teachers, having been such successful students. This part of the work, because of the pandemic, we're not going to be having this part. It's gone virtual, though we have, with the good weather months, had some one-on-one. We can stay 6 feet apart and do a lot. The group gatherings, not so much. So it's more like projections and things that no one needs to walk into to see. A camera obscura is where you turn a room into a camera. And while you're standing in it, the outside world is projecting into the space. And in that very special lighting condition, we can explore photography. And in this case, Elder and Wiser by Betsy Heaney is a group that she sponsors and facilitates about aging with creativity. And the last example of the many, like I say, many components to a view. This is part of an exhibition last fall at the Notre Dame of Maryland University. First, it was a participatory game where in silence, everybody followed independent instructions and had to navigate that space and accomplish their tasks. In some cases, conflicting tasks. Then we had a few speeches, some presentations by a couple of economists. Chris Lynn, the woman second to the left, is the co-founder of Baltimore Gift Economy. They get things and they give them to people. Amazing. Stephanie Geller, the woman on the right, runs Community Wealth Builders, which again is a portal into so many different things. The cake at the bottom is a cake. It's got edible infographics on it. The infographics are displaying data on the value of volunteer work. I love cooking. And finally, I'm just adding a couple of images that are from work. How have I been dealing with isolation? That, of course, affects, it's not limited to, well, my work has to adapt or stop or change. It's also personal. I've been alone since March 14th. So in July, I started chlorophyll prints is a photography process where you make the image on a leaf. Okay, no chemicals, it's the ultraviolet light from the sun. And so I started getting friends to send me a portrait of them wearing a mask, looking into the camera. And it takes days to expose, and I would do several at a time. So since July, every day except yesterday and today, so 2 days now. Since July, I go out and I have to get the leaves and then set all that up in these frames and then let them bake in the sun. And so I'm surrounded by the faces of friends who I can't see right now. And the mask sort of has I guess it's sad, but really it helps me feel, I feel solidarity and connection. I feel that every time I put my mask on. I feel connected to everybody who's wearing a mask, and I thank them. It's also my past. I've known Luann since 1987. I've had high school friends who I've known since the 70s send their images. The anxiety sometimes still overtakes me, but I'm just sharing these as something that to devote time every day to has made a difference, has definitely made a difference. Now and then I do use other images. These are some, for instance, some 19th century tintypes of babies, children, and or family portraits. Okay, before turning to questions or comments, just a couple of thoughts. I have no answers. If it sounded like I was going to get there, I have no answers. And I've used words like we or you a lot. I acknowledge I only speak for myself. My name is Bruce. But maybe just tossing this out there about, well, what are we, is this depressing or is this encouraging? What might we do? And I'm going to start with the idea of treat yourself. Guilt is, I just have a hard time making guilt productive. But I also have a hard time avoiding it. What did I do today? I sat out back in the sun. Well, probably I paced. It's not always easy to focus and sit. Be good if I could. But I think there are ways, I think it's important. So this list, for instance, there's everything on this list I can succumb to that easily. It goes back before memories. I'm a military brat. Grew up on US military bases, the work ethic, etc. So one thing I think is, what might we do is internalize. We've internalized a lot of stuff. There I go with we again. So maybe revisiting some of that and see, well, what parts of that need to be exercised. In the document that I will share, there are two forms. One, it's the formula I used to figure out where the real sources of funding came for that public art project in DC. And it's set up so that anyone can go through those simple questions. They are simple. I hope my wording doesn't hide that. And come up with a way to put a dollar figure on the value of your work. And you'll see, so if you volunteer, we could compare that to what is, we have data that shows us what in Maryland, this is the average hourly volunteer value. This is how much value, which happens to be about $40, okay? We can compare it to minimum wage. Did you even make minimum wage, etc. So that's one thing that's both internal, kind of helping each of us. The external means to measure have specific goals. It's like warming or cooling the thermometer again instead of the room. So this form, pretty short, is about you equipping yourself with, just if on your own, an idea of how do you agree or disagree with those external ways of measuring that. The other form, there's a link if you would be interested in participating in the skill sharing barter network. It is not limited to the arts at all. Found very quickly as I started looking into labor and the arts, how systemic things are. I stay focused on labor, but have to look at housing, healthcare, education, our judicial system, and of course, labor across industries. So that is a really short form that would make it possible at that point for me to connect with you. And finally, on that form, this is still under the treat yourself, 2 links, and they are Excel sheets. Apologies for how Excel sheets are never sexy, but listen to this, they're pretty good. One is 100-something virtual experiences in the arts in Maryland that you can go explore right now. Okay, you just click on that. I find the list daunting because it's so long and an Excel sheet doesn't look good. But then you start reading what they offer and it's amazing. There have never been, in my experience, so many free opportunities in the arts. And the other list is even better. Internationally, it's an Excel sheet of artists who have provided their name, their info, a word about their work, who agree to be contacted by anybody. And maybe it's a one-on-one virtual tour, you and that artist in their studio. Maybe it's a demo. Maybe it's a workshop. Maybe they will speak to your family, to your colleagues, to a group, your church members. It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm collaborating with 2 artists who lived, so that's 3 different countries. We've never met. It took nothing to set that up. I just looked at their work and made sure they knew how much I appreciated it, and the conversation from there connected us. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. You'll see the few, at that point in the document, there are other links. Okay, Santa Fe Art Institute, labor is the theme of their residency this year, which the on-site residencies have been postponed until next year, but they're already on it. We are already on it, the cohort. I hope next June to be there. And it's another portal into many resources above and beyond, Santa Fe Art Institute per se. Their previous cohorts and the themes, equal justice and other issues. Those are still activists, writers, artists, very accessible, very generous with their material. So again, and I won't otherwise specify what additional links are there because, I've really taken up all this time, but I'm just hoping if there's any chance to hear from anybody, questions, reactions, or an experience that you've had that you would like to share.
I find the examples really empowering in terms of art and the social impact. My question, and where I always get concerned though, is where is the revenue model for these artists and these people that are doing really important work?
Well, I wouldn't feel qualified to speak for each of those artists and their revenue models. The bit that I know about it is already, that there is not a single model. I know, so I'll have to just be personal about it because I don't feel I have enough backstory without getting in touch with them. And I worked on art where I explored art starting very, very young for at least a decade before I thought of even showing anybody. And then when I thought of showing somebody, I was so creative. I thought, well, I'm a photographer, so I guess it means an agent and or a gallery. So that's what I started doing. I learned a lot from working with galleries. Self-taught in the arts. My academic background is economics. So very generous and amazing people taught me so much about photography and the arts. But after a decade and a half or so, I started doing the math, and that was costing me way too much to mat and frame and deliver and any other thing. And for what? For how many sales? For how many? I can have people over right now. This is different. But I realized I'm not making anything, and I don't mean just dollars. The connection, the community, I'm not making none of that is happening thanks to the galleries. Okay, again, great people. I'm not upset with anyone. So my current financial model is I turn to foundations who say, we want, I look at their mission statement and say, what we want, we have money and we want to put it in the hands of an artist who uses photography to advance issues on labor. Or I find, and for instance, since the pandemic, and this is nothing is good about the pandemic. I was saying that I've never seen so many free examples of experiencing the arts. I also have never seen so much money available for the arts. I have never seen that. Now, it's possible, no data yet. So it's possible that the need and the competition is so much greater also that we're still not talking. And I would believe that, But when I stopped working, this isn't an act. When I stopped thinking of the gallery agent model as my checkbook or bank account to proceed and started saying, I'm going to go directly to people. I'm not going to count on somebody who would do that walking into a space. They advertise, they want to connect. I find most of them to have, they're investing. But Deborah, thank you, because I would otherwise, to move on, but would say that is an area that needs to be addressed. I think artists and the arts should be treated like research and development. The market will never provide sufficient funds because you have to get it wrong a lot before you produce that vaccine, before you produce that masterpiece. And in research and development, sometimes sports, right? That athlete will need to train for 20 years, or at least 10, right? Because 20, I guess you retire that depending on your sport. But and so that I know you would. I wish I could give you that. Like, here's the formula for any of those artists. But it would definitely be a takeaway for me on that is if there's any serious growth to be made about financial security for artists, it would be treat it like research and development. They need salaries, they need guaranteed income, and they can get it wrong 999 times. I think that's Edison's quote about the light bulb before he got it right. And it's like, that's fine. because when you get it right, it's going to make such a difference. It was worth it.
Thank you. The treating artists like R&D is an interesting concept. And, I wonder how many of anyone have the skills and the resources to go after a lot of these fun foundations. I mean, that's like a whole job in itself. So I appreciate what you're saying. And it also just seems like a distraction from what the artist would want to do.
Well, I've never found another job that covers my bills and only requires me to put in 1 hour a week.
Yeah. Cool.
So Bruce, what is the model that you're thinking about with your, oh gosh, I forgot the name of it, but the Skillshare, where your idea was the artist would train someone and then they would go on and be hired to train other people or teach a class or whatever. Where would I guess the money would come from the participants, or how would that work?
Everybody's paid. I think of everybody as a worker. The mentors are paid, the mentees are paid, everyone's paid.
Yeah.
Because if you're there, you're working.
Right.
And especially, we don't, again, about how we define work even.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you acknowledge it's work, I sometimes have difficulty raising funds to cover people's transportation costs, for instance. It's just not sexy enough. But I'm like, what is that single parent who lives on the other side of town, who uses 2 buses to get to work, 3 if a grocery stop has to be included? None of them bring them anywhere near my studio or one of the other artists. So, can we get $20 to chip in for some transportation? And man, sometimes that's like pulling teeth. But it also obviously needs to be, or I shouldn't say obviously, that's one of the top priorities for me in terms of fundraising right now, is that to be able to think of it as well, maybe full-time is a little ambitious right now, but employment, whether you're in the training part or the trainee, and definitely the skill sharing that with sufficient engagement, though you might have started as a trainee, if you continue, we would like to see that flip and you become a trainer and you move on to that side of the exchange.
Okay, so wait a minute. So where would the money come from to pay everybody?
Different foundations.
Oh, that would be foundations too. Okay, all right.
Yeah, though in scale, I think it needs to build a little bit more in scale before.
Yeah.
But when I say foundations, almost exclusively, I'm connecting with those who specialize almost exclusively in the arts, to the extent that the very program starts to include a more serious, a more substantial job training and career advancement component.
Gotcha.
Commerce departments and there are other entities where that's what they say they have money for, and have that become sources of revenue for it. Also, we can imagine producing works that have a market value, and having that be part of the fund available funds.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Other questions?
Bruce, could you talk a little bit more about the barter aspect of the Skillshare?
Yeah. So one, that's an example. Remember, I was saying I'm not that comfortable with the new economy as our hopeful or helpful term. Barter would definitely be an example of something that is in no way new, and almost everybody's life involves some form of barter, right? There are just certain exchanges of goods and or services where that's how it is. You're not thinking. No one is, but it doesn't mean that there weren't, that there wasn't a value to the goods and services exchanged. So barter initially, like much of the labor stuff, started in the art world, where again, already a pretty common practice. But also it seemed right away that it's most functional, and I'll say most exciting even, the more open it is. So for instance, I was able to trade, it was actually a gentleman who participated in the mentor part of it at one point, an electrician by trade, and I have ceiling fans now. And for the first time in his young adult life, he actually has his own home that had nothing but blank walls. Well, I happen to be a visual artist, and so he gets some. So I would say the biggest challenge to it is helping people see how it's actually something they probably already are familiar with and engaged in, simply because we're so used to evaluating based on the dollar. When you are able to say to yourself, that's $240 worth of something for me, then you're not so sure about receiving, say, that painting or a ceiling fan when you're like, actually, a YouTube video could have probably shown me how to install. You know, we have a hard time recognizing all of the community and value when we pull the dollar figure out of the exchange. Is that something you've experienced, Jennifer?
Yeah, I remember early working for an artist who would barter services with her veterinarian or different, body work type of things. But I never saw it on a larger scale. Just always been fascinated by it. I just haven't paid attention to how, you're kind of like operationalizing it or something in this program. So, right. So I guess it's hard to like, it seems like a lot of individual definitions of value come into play. It seems like it would be fascinating to try to barter with somebody, argue the value, like you said, taking away money, taking away, our general concepts of money and time and market value of stuff. So it seems like a way to like almost build community too, as you're talking to somebody, it's not just, this is, worth this many dollars or whatever. So it's like a relationship builder. I don't know, I'm just fascinated by this Skillshare project. Is there information online? Are you going to be sharing that more with us?
There's a form again, and I will I need to find it and put it in chat. But this document that I said I'm going to share has a link both to the skill sharing network, and again, it's just very little information is all we need to get started. And there's also a form for a way that anybody, just another way to think of evaluating what the value of your hourly work is actually worth, to just kind of see, I've for certain projects, I've used that exact same formula and seen that I didn't even make minimum wage, or despite what I was paid. In the end, I actually subsidized the project. I didn't just accept $1 an hour or 10 cents an hour. It's like, well, actually, I paid them to put me to work. And both of those are in the document. And I am listening. That's what I'm going to do, is find that document and get it in that chat. About the barter also, I would just say, Jennifer, one thing is there's an odd challenge in that it has a lot to do with trust. So the power of small and getting two people to the table is really important. However, its fluidity increases as its size increases, because I mean, I'm not going to need 10 ceiling fans. And the person who got a beautiful aerial view in a private, small plane in exchange for some work, they're not going to want to go up in that plane every month. So that's a bit of a challenge, I find, is the small is actually how it works, because we can trust, we can speak until it's clear this is a good deal. It's win-win. But if you only have 10 participants, even if everybody has 2 amazing skills, we're still limited at that point to 20 needs that anybody in the network could meet. So there's a bit of an ongoing learning curve.
Yeah, and you mentioned something about health services too. So I'm in the health services field, so doing therapy. So something like that. Have you worked with that? Something that's like an ongoing service?
Well, specifically, the closest would be, in a way, but it's more like not limited to yoga, but it's more like people who are, it's the whole experience. It's both mental, emotional, intellectual, and usually physical. Something about just a wholeness, kind of catch your breath there. But that would be fantastic. I work a lot with homeless. I work a lot with demographics that is probably some form of healthcare therapy is probably going to be a part of their lives forever. And I am happy to share that there are some great experiences in that. But it strikes me, as someone who does not know that field, it strikes me that, like many fields, exploring new ways to satisfy those needs for the person, both the giver, what are the giver's needs, the person who can do that, and the receiver. Sometimes the power of small again, there are times that people have shared things one-on-one that they acknowledge they have never told any counselor, any therapist, any doctor. They have never used those words before. So it's intimidating, right? Not in the sense of responsibility, not like I'm going to go tell anybody, but it's just like, see, the thing is, some of those people might have skills that because you shared that, that's going to matter. We can take it up a notch. Whereas me, I can just like hold your hand. I can acknowledge that, that is, I don't know what that is. I'm not going to pretend, or I can say, you know what? Until I was 15, I lived in that space too. That's exactly where but I don't have the skills that someone like you or others might be able to, in that context where, in a way, we try to level the playing field. Right? That's why
I guess that's what I was thinking about, like community building, just another opportunity for connecting, period. Yeah.
I am listening. I am going to find that document. See, if I had an assistant, I could blame my assistant for not being organized.
So yes, we're waiting on that. We have about 3 minutes left. So if there's any more questions, please don't be shy. We have I have another meeting. Can you believe that? So yeah, any more questions as Bruce frantically searches for his document?
Hi, so I'm Elizabeth. I'm just so excited by your talk because I ran a business for 30 years and then I got into the arts, and then I realized there's no money here. And this woman had told me this when I first sold my business. She said, you don't want to do that. You want to start another business and do the art thing on the side. And she was kind of right, I got a grant recently, and I did it more as a dare. Okay. I got a grant a few years ago from an arts organization for $3,500. And it was to help me do a business plan for an arts camp, a STEAM camp. And it only covered my travel expenses to go meet this NASA author who was going to collaborate with me. And, I thought, I kind of felt good that they actually thought it was a good idea to get a grant to write a business plan. But even the grant to write the business plan wasn't going to cover my costs to actually do the business plan, to do everything I had to do and all the time that I was going to have to take to actually write the plan. They were only giving me money that I was going to be giving to other people, but not to me. So I totally get what you're talking about. I think your plan is really good. I hope I'll be able to stay in touch. And when I get a link to your program, I'll send it to my other friends here. But I really love the parts that you've given here. I don't really have a question. I just want to thank you very much, putting it out there and as frankly as you did.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and I sympathize. I can relate. I think part of that is again where it's like, and so we're going to have to wear many hats. And the art administrator on that public art project in DC was just a bad egg. Okay, that was just a mess. But I'm happy to say that more often I work with some who they're with all due respect, we have to just put on that educator hat. They think they're doing a good job, but like the words you just said, they might not factor that in. One project that I have yet to get funded will be with a men's shelter just a few blocks from here, and a mural, and it's actually part of the mentor and the community thing again. But I called at one point one application to be sure that I could include certain things in the budget. And one of the things, so this was going to take about 7 days worth of work. So I said, can I include a line item for lunch? And they said no. I'm like, I mean, how? And again, I don't even think they're necessarily bad people. One solution or one thing that I think would be really helpful, and I bet we're never going to see, that doesn't mean we have to keep pushing. Artists should be at the table when these decisions are made. Even again, without the experience, even the best of hearts could possibly come up with that answer. It wasn't like it blew the budget. It would still be within the maximum you can even ask us for, but that actually was going to just suddenly come out of everybody's pocket, as if it's not an expense. It just couldn't be defined as one. So anyway, thank you for sharing, Elizabeth. And I have found, so let me do this. Here is.
I just wanted to share also that since I thought that this project that I was thinking about, and I knew it ahead of time, was going to cost too much for anybody to pay for eventually, I gave the money back. I gave the grant back because I know like this would be a waste of their money, because the business plan will show, without even me putting the numbers down, that it's not going to pay for itself.
Hey, well, I appreciate your integrity there. That power to you. That's fantastic. The National Endowment for the Arts, I didn't go into that very much and how politicized that's been from its inception in the 60s. But by the 80s, just before Senator Helms and others bring their funding to artists to a halt, certain artists who had applied and received it already felt it had gotten so politicized that they turned it down. They said, I'll just have to figure it out.
So we're at time. So Bruce,
I promise I found the finder window.
put it in there, Bruce. No, but I do want to say thank you to Bruce for this talk. I learned a whole lot, and definitely a topic that we could, talk about for much longer. And I also want to thank everybody who attended today. The recording will be shared. So if you sign up through Eventbrite, I will send it to you directly. Yay, Bruce shared the document now. And then if you sign up through Eventbrite, I will send it to you, but Bruce is also going to make the documents and his video and this video available on his website. Is that not correct, Bruce?
Correct.
Yes, good. Okay. Awesome. So
and please, at that point, some of you have been asking if you can reach me. I'm going to put my email address here. My website gives my contact info also. It's just my name at gmail.com.
Okay. And
Please be in touch.
If for some reason you cannot see the document, please put your email in the chat and I will get it to you, or you can email Bruce directly. But I just downloaded it. I can send it to you. So I just need your email. Unless you signed up on Eventbrite, I have your email. But if you didn't, put it in the chat right now and we will make sure you get the document. Thank you very much. Let's do that. All right. So thank you, everybody. I also added a document. Hey, Ash, I see you. Stay on. I added a document to the chat about our other upcoming Free Fall Baltimore events. The next one is on Friday evening at 7 o'clock, same bat channel. It is going to be Fred Watkins, who is a comedian, and he also runs an after-school anti-bullying program, and he's going to have some of his students perform their pieces. So please join us. So thanks again, and I'll see you hopefully on Friday.
Thank you, Bruce.
All right, thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank you,
Oh,
Bruce.
absolutely.
Lovely.
Janet.
Looking forward to more.
Awesome. Awesome, Bruce, we did it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you again, Janet.
Absolutely, I'll be in touch for sure. I still want to do camera obscura, in the AC